morning, Mr. Little. Miss Graham.
Thank you. On Friday, we were talking about your decision to disclose the fact that blunt force trauma had not been the cause of death.
Yes.
And you spoke to us about your rationale, and we went through the reasons that you had taken into account when you made that decision. This was on your inquiry statement, SBPI 421, at paragraph 67, I think. If we look at your response, you say you're aware your actions were unprecedented, and you explain your reasons, and I think if we move up the page, you set out the various factors that you took into account. And I think we went through those on Friday afternoon.
That's great.
That's just to let you see what we'd talked about. Did you consider, when you were making this decision, whether taking a view, telling the officers about the post-mortem interim preliminary information that you'd had from the pathologist, and taking a view on their status was perhaps premature at that stage?
I think, as I explained on Friday, everything was kind of unusual about this investigation. The fact that officers had not provided any statements, any initial accounts. We later found out that the information that was passed to Keith Harrower was, a lot of it was inaccurate. Yeah. So, as I've said there, it was unprecedented that I did this. Sitting here now, I can understand maybe saying it was maybe premature, but I was trying to weigh up of getting the statements from the officers. This was causing untold harm to the investigation, and ultimately it caused untold distress to the family. I was hoping that if I could get the statements when I met the family, and I think originally at that time I was hopeful we were going to meet the family on the 5th, but it wasn't arranged till the 6th, I could say to them, we've got the statements. I've just had a phone call, the statements are in, right? And that would have been a huge step forward. It would have been a very positive step in respect of the investigation, and it would have been a very, very positive step in respect of our relationship with the family. So yes, I know we're sitting in hindsight here. I said to you, I've never done it prior to this, I've never done it since then, but I was trying to break a deadlock here, and unfortunately that deadlock continued. And actually what I think is the disappointing thing is, I later became aware is the information I was passed by Detective Superintendent Campbell as the officers would be spoken to that night. My understanding was they were not spoken to that night, and that is disappointing. And that is my understanding, is they were not spoken to that night by the police.
That you've been advised of that, have you?
Yes. I recall that the information I received later was they hadn't been spoken to that night by Mr. McCune. So me taking that step, me kind of making that decision, what I thought for the best intentions, was it actually taken forward by the other step. Yeah.
Who told you that?
That was when we met with Keith Hardy on the 6th after we met with the family, and I was hopeful then that we would go and there would actually be some of the statements there, something there, because that's the 4th, and then we get to the 6th. How long would it take them to prepare an operational statement?
So on the 6th, you were advised by Keith Hardy that in fact the officers hadn't been told.
His understanding was they hadn't been spoken to that night.
I mean, we've heard other evidence that they had been told.
Okay.
And in fact, Conrad Trickett described a conversation he had with Jane Combe regarding the disclosure to the officers. You don't know anything about that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Did you have any concerns in relation to making this decision whether sharing this information could have an impact on the officer's own recollection of events?
No, I don't think so. I think it was important to capture their recollection of events as soon as possible. There is a PIP process, yes, you know, and the methodology and the rationale why that PIP process is, and I know the timescales, how they arrived at these timescales when the PIP was designed, I don't know. But what I would say is, in my experience, is the longer you leave it till you take a statement of somebody, is their perception of what happens can change.
We've heard, Evans, that when if people are given further information, that could potentially impact their recollection. It could perhaps change things that they thought were the case, and that's a risk if you do not capture that initial account or basic account or their own recollections.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I go back, it was the information they got was I put forward was very, very limited. It was unascertained pending toxicology and further examination, and I'd asked the question, was blunt force trauma, you know, responsible, and I was told no. So the information's very, very limited. It's not as if it's like when the full post-mortem report came out and you're providing that information in respect to that. There was no details passed to Police Scotland, although Police Scotland knew of the injuries that were identified on Mr. Bayou's body. Okay.
So the fact that you were giving what you consider to be limited information, was that also a factor in your decision-making process? Did you consider whether it would be potentially perceived, say by the family or members of the public, that the police were being given preferential treatment by being given information about the post-mortem?
Well, yes, I can see that, because as I've said to you, it's not something I've done previously, it's not something I've done since. I'm not aware of it happening since, you know, within my organisation we've did that. Yeah, I can understand that you stand, but I stand by the whole objective here was to get statements of these officers, because it was hindering, and it was hindering in a way because we didn't have basic facts. I'm aware that Mr. Trickett says he didn't get the basic facts because the basic facts were known. Well, they weren't known, because the information that Keith Harrell passed, particularly information on the briefing paper, we now know that's inaccurate, and we knew as we built the evidence that was inaccurate. So they didn't know the basic facts. We didn't have initial accounts. You know, so here we are. I'm in day 2 here. I've just taken over, and we have to find, if I could see a blockage right away, and I could see the problems that were coming down the line, for want of a better expression. Yes, so I made this decision. I've never hidden this decision. I've never hidden that this is what I did. You know, so it wasn't as if something I did and then you know, everybody within my organisation was aware. Crown were aware that I did this. You know, nobody passed adverse comment to me about having done it.
How were the Crown aware?
My recollection is that, well, first of all, it was in my statement that I submitted when we submitted the first report. So I think the statement, I can't remember the date, is it July? I prepared a statement. I think I'm in that, and I'd prepared a briefing paper after day 7 in respect of where we were.
So the Crown were aware retrospectively?
Oh yeah, they weren't aware I was going to make that decision.
No.
No, sorry, I don't want to give that impression. They were not aware that, you know, that was a decision I made that night to do that.
To go back for a moment to the idea of a perception perhaps of preferential treatment to the officers, did you consider whether that perception, which you've acknowledged could have been created, had any impact on the trust in your investigation, the faith in your investigation, and it being independent?
Sitting here nearly 9 years later, I cannot recall if that was a consideration I made at that time. Okay, I considered my rationale for making that decision, or why I was going to make that decision. If there was an indication, there was no statements forthcoming when we sat down with Mr. Campbell. Yeah, my consideration with regard to the family was I was hopeful that we would get statements, so I would be able to, when I sat with the family, and say the matter of the statements has been resolved and is overcome, and we're getting the statements, or we have the statements.
You've talked about the decision being unprecedented in your role in PIRC, either before or
Yes.
after May 2015. You obviously had a lot of prior experience as a police officer. Had you been involved in any situations where you had disclosed preliminary post-mortem findings to potential eyewitnesses?
Not that I recall, no.
We've focused so far on blunt force trauma,
Yes.
and that was not a cause of death. Did you consider other possible causes of death as part of the significance of those towards your investigation? For example, positional asphyxia. Did you consider whether that could be a cause of death?
Well, that cause of death would be identified kind of later through the kind of pathology and the expert witness kind of process that was adopted.
And the same, I suppose, would apply to mechanical
Yes.
asphyxia. What about the restraint itself? Did you consider whether the restraint of itself could be a potential cause of death, resulting in cardiac arrest?
Well, at that time we didn't know, because it was unascertained pending, toxicology and further examination, and that would be further examination down the line.
Did you discuss those at all with the possibility of those with the pathologist after the post-mortem?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you consider whether those potential causes would impact on the status of the officers?
Well, if it came to pass that was the primary or the sole reason for Mr. Bowes' demise, then yes, the status of the officers would be something that would be under consideration.
Right. And if the ultimate findings had been that restraint contributed or caused death, or positional or mechanical asphyxia
Yes.
had contributed or caused death, what impact would that have had on the officer's status?
Well, that would need to have been, I would suggest, given, the time that would have maybe came through from the pathology, the further tests that were done, is their status may have changed. And the reason I do that is maybe as we discussed on Friday, is police officers are unique in society, as they're allowed to use force, they're legitimately allowed to use force, and even lethal force. So it then become, what was their justification for it? What was their rationale? What was, the factors there? Yes. But when I made that decision, that was not known. And as I said, it was very limited information that I passed, very, very limited.
Did you consider that if one of those potential causes of death did turn out to be the final result of the post-mortem, and you had taken the decision to share some interim results with the officers, did you consider that at that time what would happen in the future to the status of the officers, or how it would look to the public that you've shared information about preliminary results with them?
No, I didn't. No, I have to, no, I don't recall that, no.
Right. We touched on the timing of the information about the post-mortem being shared with the family on Friday.
Yes.
I'd like to go back to that. I think the relevant paragraph is 62 of your inquiry statement, which is on the screen. And you refer back to your first inquiry statement, 255, and you say, actually, I can't recall when the family were advised of the result of the post-mortem. However, the information may have been delivered via the flows, and if so, would be recorded in the flow log.
Yes.
And I think on Friday afternoon, you said you thought the family had been told by Amar Anwar, their solicitor,
That's correct, yes.
or Mr. Lewis, the flow.
That's correct, yes.
Now, we've heard some evidence that the family were not told and did not know about the post-mortem until the next day. If you had known that the family had not been told, either by Mr. Anwar or by Mr. Lewis, about the post-mortem, would that have altered your decision to authorise disclosure of the PM results to the officers?
Potentially, yes. Because I made this decision based on the factor that I'd had a discussion with Alistair Lewis. I'd advised Alistair of the interim result that Miss Shearer had, you know, relayed to myself, and I knew he had the meeting with the family, and he was going to advise Amar Anwar. Now the next day he told me that he had advised Mr. Anwar. And if I go back to my first statement to the inquiry, where I said I couldn't recall, just for clarification in that matter, when I said it would be in the flow log, is I did that statement sitting in my house with access to no paperwork, so I was running off memory, and that's why I said, you know, the details will be in the flow log.
We've heard something from Mr. Lewis about this as well. But if a situation had arisen that the family were not told about the results of the the preliminary results of the post-mortem until after the officers, sitting here now on reflection, do you have any comment to make about that possible scenario?
If that is what has happened, bearing in mind my understanding what's happened is Mr. Anwar was made aware, and obviously Alistair and John Clerkin were meeting with the family earlier that night. In fact, when I was sitting with Pat Campbell, there's a good chance they were still sitting with the family. Yeah, I would be uncomfortable with that.
Why?
Because it's only right and respectful that the family are made aware before anybody else is. Now but I have to also say, Police Scotland knew the result of the post-mortem. Police Scotland,
I think you mentioned on Friday that was because
They were
officers had been present
They were there.
during
Yeah.
the post-mortem. When you told us on Friday about the meeting you'd had at Kirkcaldy Police Office with
Yes,
Campbell and Hardy and, was it Wilson?
I think it was Stuart Wilson, yes.
Where you discussed this possibility of disclosure to the officers.
Yes.
Did anyone at that meeting suggest or say, if you're going to advise officers, we better make sure the family are told first?
No. No.
Did you consider confirming with either or via Mr. Anwar or with Mr. Lewis that the family had actually been told first?
No, I didn't, because I was working on, and it is an assumption, that they would be told.
You talked to us on Friday afternoon and today. You talked about your expectation that you would get the statements pretty much the next day.
Yes.
I think, is that fair to say? With that expectation in mind, had you prepared a witness interview strategy for the next day or started to?
No. No.
So if the officers had said the following day, we've heard about the post-mortem, we're going to give you statements, what would your plan have been at that time about obtaining the statements from the officers?
Well, at that time, I would have expected the officers to submit their own statement, as would be the invariably the normal process through the PIP process. You know, there's the basic facts which the PIP would get. It's the initial accounts which the officers would either in the main write themselves, or sometimes you have a PIM will write it for them. But if you have a number of police officers, it's normally they would write it themselves. And then there's what they call the stage 4 aspect, where within 48 hours the police officers invariably supply their own statements or write their own statements. It's very, very rare that we would put a team to take a statement off them at that time. And I would expect them to write their own statement, what would maybe refer to as an operational statement, and we would get that statement, we would be able to examine it, and then in due course we would invariably go back to the officers once we've gathered more information, you know, like we talked about Friday, the airwave, the storms, the records, and we would go back and get more detailed statements off them. So it wasn't a case of thinking, oh, I better have an interview strategy ready for each of the 9 officers. I would expect of them to have supplied an operational statement.
And I think on Friday you talked about the possibility of having a statement taken from an investigator with PIRC, or preparing a self-penned or written statement themselves. Yes. So am I clear in understanding that actually you would have expected on the 5th a sort of self-penned or operational statement from the officers?
Yes, I would have.
And what would you have expected in terms of your PIRC investigation after you received self-penned statements? Would there have been a planned interview at some stage with PIRC?
Yes, depending on what the investigation had identified and what evidence we'd then gathered over a period of time. But you know, in these certain circumstances, I cannot envisage that we wouldn't be going back to the principal officers, if calling the principal officers. But I expected an operational statement from each of them, yes.
Okay. Can I ask you for your comment? We've heard evidence from Pat Campbell and Keith Hardy. I asked questions of them in relation to this disclosure of the PM results, the interim results. Keith Hardy gave evidence on the 15th of March last year. He was taken to the Gold Group minute meetings. Do you remember the ones I showed you for the 12:30 meeting on the 4th of May?
Yes.
Where there was a task and asking about the issue of disclosure. And I asked him, do you remember any discussion about disclosing post-mortem results to the officers? And he said he didn't. And he says, I'm pretty confident I was never involved in any discussion in relation to that. So he doesn't have any recollection of a meeting with you on the 4th of May in relation to disclosure. Can you provide any explanation for that?
No, I can't provide any explanation for that.
Are you confident that you did have that meeting in Kirkcaldy on the 4th of May?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then we spoke to Campbell and took his evidence on the 14th of March last year. And again, we asked him about this issue in relation to disclosure and the task, and asked him if in relation to his involvement. He says Gary McEwen raised the matter at the Gold Group meeting. There was a detailed discussion. The main representative from PIRC was Billy Little. The discussion was around we would deploy PIRC flows to deliver the results of the PM to the family. The second aspect was Gary McEwen thought it would be beneficial in their status as witnesses for their welfare and well-being for them to be told about the results of the post-mortem. Sorry, I'm reading that out. It doesn't really, grammatically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But there was a discussion with Gary McEwen that they would maybe deploy PIRC flows to deliver the results of the post-mortem to the family. And the second aspect was Gary McEwen thought it would be beneficial in relation to their status as witnesses and for welfare and well-being for them to know the results of the post-mortem. Do you remember any discussion in relation to that, or being advised by Pat Campbell that Gary McEwen had been discussing it?
First of all, I maybe picked you up a wee bit wrong there, Miss Graham. Is that an inference then that I was at that Gold Group meeting?
No, I think you've already said, and others have said, you weren't at that
No, I wasn't
Gold
at
Group
it.
meeting.
No.
But this was Pat Campbell's understanding of the situation regarding conversation about disclosure.
Right, okay.
Did he raise any of that at the meeting
No.
you say he
No.
attended?
The first I became aware that there was any prior discussion about disclosure to the principal officers was when I read those goal group meetings, and what day that was, but it was ever we received the goal group meetings or took possession of the goal group meetings. Okay, I was not aware. As far as I was concerned in relation to the disclosure of this information, and that was a decision I was making based on the rationale that I have provided. I was totally unaware, and I'm actually quite surprised, and I think I expressed that surprise on Friday when I looked at the goal group meetings, that actually was being discussed. Because, and I'll take you back to what I've said a couple of times, is I've never known this to occur. I've never known, but I felt, given the circumstances that we had, that I thought it was the best way to break the stalemate. Ultimately it didn't, but
Ultimately, you did get a final report from the pathologist.
yes.
And we've heard evidence from Kerry-Ann Shearer in relation to this. She was the pathologist. And that final report we've heard was dated the 18th of June,
Yes.
2015. So this was after you had the statements from the officers.
Yes, that's correct.
Got them on the 4th. And the cause of death, Dr. Shearer gave evidence about on the 9th of May last year, that it was sudden death in a man intoxicated by MDMA, which was ecstasy, and alpha PVP, whilst being restrained. And in evidence, Dr. Shearer said that would now include and the struggle against the restraint, not just the restraint itself.
Okay.
If you had not disclosed the interim results to the officers and you delayed until after you got the final report, which would have been the 18th of June, so after the initial statements, after you got the final report, would that have altered your view about the status of the officers?
I'll go back to when you asked me just a short time ago, said it would have made me think more about the status of the officers, I can put that. Okay. Right. So if I say on the 4th, there was no evidence to suggest that they were responsible in any way for a criminal act. So they were not suspects. They were not suspects at that time. When you know that the final report came out as, yes, you have the cause of death, and it was whilst being restrained, right? But I think also Miss Shearer, if I remember right from my reading of that postmortem report, and you know, it may well be, when I'm sitting here just now, my recollection is that she could not determine how much the restraint had on the cause of death. So it wasn't like Miss Shearer was saying the restraint was the primary cause of death, or how much the restraint had played in the death. So that then became how do we take this forward? So we've got MDMA. We know quite a lot about MDMA in this country. Alpha PVP we knew nothing about. Now my recollection is at that time when we did just some research on alpha PVP, there had been one seizure of alpha P, and it was at a festival or something like that. So we knew nothing about alpha PVP. So the discussion was, right, how do we find out about alpha PVP and the restraint? Then we'll need to look at the restraint and have identified experts in the area of roundabout restraint to give us some opinion in respect of the part that restraint played in that man's death. Okay. So it wouldn't, just because we got that report, I wouldn't immediately have said, well, they're suspects now, aren't they? Okay, because we've got no definitive that a crime has occurred here.
Did you have a discussion with Dr. Shearer about the contribution that restraint had in the cause of death?
No, I don't think I did actually. I think I thought it wasn't like I was having regular discussions with Miss Shearer in respect to this. I think, and my recollection is that I made Miss Shearer aware, or Miss Shearer became aware that there was expert witness testimony being sought because we needed to obtain some samples, and Crown gave authority that the samples be released to us as an organisation, you know, so they could be taken to the different experts for examining the histology samples that she had possession of.
Just to be clear about this, Dr. Shearer gave evidence that the initial post-mortem was pending toxicology and
Yes.
further investigations. The final report was after those results had been obtained. That was the 18th of June. Was it your understanding that she was seeking further expert?
Oh, I may begin.
Or was it the Crown at that stage, or was it PIRC?
Or the Crown issued instruction about the expert witnesses. The exact date of it, I would need to refresh myself from, you know.
Well, I think the final report was dated the 18th of June, the final
Yeah.
post-mortem report. And that was after Dr. Shearer, as I understand her evidence, had completed the toxicology and the further investigations.
Okay, yes, but there then became the instructions from Crown in respect of identifying experts who could provide expert testimony in respect of the alpha PVP and the restraint, because that came later.
Was it your understanding then that that issue still had to be resolved in some way through expert
Yes.
opinion evidence?
Yes.
And perhaps with assistance from the Crown, we might hear about this later, and with the involvement of PIRC in instructing experts, that was done, that line of investigation was followed.
Yes.
But did you consider at that time, after you got the final post-mortem report, the impact of something we've heard about in evidence called material contribution? Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't. No.
Can I move on, please, and ask you about the paperwork that surrounds this decision that you made in relation to disclosure? I think you have a hard copy of your notebook. We looked at that on Friday. Hope you've still got that. It's PIRC 04200.
Thank you.
And I really just want to confirm that I've not missed anything in your notebook, but what, if anything, did you note in your notebook on the 4th of May that related to this decision to make a disclosure to the officers? Can I just say, I couldn't find anything, but I want you to check
No, I
your own
don't-
writing.
No, yeah, no, that's fine. There is no details in respect of that disclosure. Apart from, I think it's item 5. I've got witness statements from all officers and staff, and I've got 9 officers, and then I've got admin, Detective Super Campbell, admin.
What page are you on? Can
I'm
you
on
tell us?
page, that it says 47 at the top. So I'm on the
47 is the number.
sorry, you just scrolled by it there, sorry. There.
And I think maybe page 3.
It's not,
We're talking about the 4th of May,
yeah.
and I think we see that at the bottom of page 2. On the left-hand column, we see 4th of May.
Oh, sorry, 47 is the reference number on that
See,
book. Every page is marked
yes,
47, my
yes.
apologies.
So at the bottom on the left-hand side, we see Monday, 4th of May,
Yep.
2015. So this is the section where you're dealing in your notebook with the 4th of May.
Yep.
And it goes on to the next page, page 3, and then on page 4, on the left-hand column, we can see at the bottom Tuesday, the 5th of May.
Yeah.
So if there was an entry
So-
about this decision, it would be on one of those
It would,
pages.
yeah. So we've got, if you look at the first, the left-hand page, and you've got number 4 and then number 5 just coming down
Now is that
on the left-hand side.
page 2 or page 3? Let's go back to page 2. We see on the left-hand side at the bottom, it says 4th of May. Do you see that there? So is it that page you're referring to? That's
Yep.
page 2.
Yep. Okay, so if you go to the next page,
Right, page 3.
yeah, and if you look at the top, right, okay, so, okay, if you then go to the next page,
Page 4.
okay, so, sorry, so if you stop the left-hand, how obviously pages are kind of double bind, yeah, so the left-hand page, if you look at the points, and there's 4 and then there's 5,
Yes.
and you've got 5 witness statements for all officers and staff, from all officers and staff, yeah.
Yes.
So this is me agreeing with Mr Campbell what's required, yeah.
Right.
And I've got 9 officers, advised detective superintendent, detective, so it's D/super,
Yes.
Campbell, that status following PM was witnesses, and they could be advised of interim PM result. And they've got C/superintendent McEwen, attending office, and will personally contact each officer and ask for statements.
Thank you. So that's the area where you note the discussion that took place.
Yes,
And that does mention Chief Superintendent McEwen
yes,
as the person that's going to be providing that disclosure to the officers
That's correct.
personally. And so that ties in with what Pat Campbell said early in evidence.
okay, yeah.
And is that following on from the meeting that you had in Kirkcaldy Police Office with Campbell, Hardy and Wilson?
Yeah, because the next line is 2055, I left Kirkcaldy.
Right, thank you. And then can we look at your day book,
Yes.
04520? And I think the relevant page is page 9. And there's a reference to a meeting there, 2005.
Yep.
If we can move further down the page, we'll see the time. There it is. Meeting with Pat Campbell. And it was this a note in your day book about that meeting?
That is, yes.
And can you help us understand the notes that relate to this discussion or this decision?
Yeah, it's just, well, I've got scribbly notes there. I've got O/S action, so 1, goal group terms of reference, 2, movements confirmed, 3, CCTV strategy, dash scope done by P/Scotland, H2H, which would be house-to-house strategy, and then I've got a couple of dashes in Gordon Stamford. I've got 5, officers' clothing, 6, CS spray, and I've got open brackets PABA. I've got 7, nothing forensic from Locus, and 8, I've got social media, and then I've got 9,
And can we move up the page there?
No,
Because
my
there is some
apologies.
word
Yep,
down.
9.
No.
and then
And
I've got confirmed officer status as witnesses.
And was
If you go
that
to the
part
next-
of the discussion that you
Yeah,
had?
and if you go to the next
And
stage,
then on to page 10.
I've got 07:10 AM,
Yes.
I've got telecoms,
And what's that in connection with?
I've got scribbling kind of circles as mobiles, 2 T/calls.
Is any of that in connection with this decision?
No,
No.
and then we come down to the next bit. Commando will be coming in to telephone or T/call each of the officers of their status.
And I think on Friday you told us the commander was McEwen.
That's correct.
And so that was the following morning at 7:10. Was
Yep.
that when that entry was made?
Yeah. So if you continue on as well, if you scroll up,
Yeah.
I've noted Keith Hardy, DCI, Met East,
Yes.
because I said to you, I didn't know who Keith Hardy was. Yeah. I've got,
But you knew that he'd been at the post-mortem
yeah,
and
yeah,
he'd been
yeah,
at the
yeah,
meeting.
but I was unsure, so you're there, yeah.
Right.
I've got, and then I've got FLO, death message, read out statement from Pat Campbell, Gary McEwen. I was trying to understand, that was in respect of what had happened, in respect of the delivery of the death message. And then, again, I've got Gary McEwen, I've got social media, background to victim, and then
Is any of that related to the disclosure?
no,
To the- no,
the disclosure
that's-
as the point about commander will be coming in, telephone each of it, yeah,
All right.
and obviously
And the previous page.
confirm officer status as witnesses. So it was discussed at that meeting.
Thank you. And then on the policy log, we heard about that on Friday. You said John McSporran was the author of that policy log.
That's correct, yes.
And it was started on the 5th of May. Can we look at PIRC 04153? And if we can look at, I mean, item 1, for example, just to remind us of this document. It says the decision number, the decision itself, the reason for the decision, the officer making the decision, and it gives the date.
Yes.
And if we could look at could we look at, I appreciate this policy log commenced on the 5th of May, but I think you told us on Friday you'd discussed entries with Mr McSporran at different times.
Yes.
I'm interested in item 9. So this is an entry John McSporran made on the 7th of May, or appears to be, and it talks about the post-mortem examination. Now that, we know that took place on the 4th of May, that day before John McSporran started the log, but he's obviously recorded this here.
Yes.
And I'm interested in this entry. Was this completed with some guidance from yourself to Mr McSporran?
Oh, I can't recall, sorry.
Right. All right.
I mean, I obviously prepared a kind of note on what had happened at the post-mortem, whether John used that or whether he had that information, because I would have briefed him when he came on duty on the 5th and what had taken place.
There's no mention there of any decision in relation to
No.
and no mention of blunt head trauma not being the cause of death.
No.
Do you remember if you gave that information to Mr McSporran or not?
Well, I think I would have been. I think, as I said, said earlier, I've never hidden the fact that, I did disclose to Police Scotland and asked, say they could tell the officers that. So.
All right, thank you. But there are references in both your daybook
Yes.
and your notebook
Yes.
that relate to this. And they were prepared shortly after the discussion or at the time of the discussion?
The notes in my daybook, I would suggest they were made at the time of the discussion, and then I would later, at an available time, I would have made an entry into my notebook, which is a normal book, as you're aware, that you would produce when you were at court,
Right.
if you were involved in a court proceedings.
All right, thank you. Can we move on, please? And can I ask you about your second inquiry statement, paragraph 73? That's the 421. So you realised you weren't getting statements.
Yes.
We'll get this up on the screen in a moment. It's paragraph 73. And I think when you were giving your statement, you were asked whether you'd considered speaking to the officers direct yourself to tell them about their status.
Yes.
And to make a direct request to them to give statements. And I think here you say, in hindsight, I believe that is exactly what I should have done. and it is something I always do now when in attendance at an out-of-hours incident or a post-incident procedure. But up until this point, the request for a statement from a police officer or a member of police staff had always been requested via Police Scotland, and this had presented no challenges previously.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this? I mean, obviously in hindsight you think that's exactly what you should have done. Was there anything stopping you doing that other than normal procedure as you didn't?
Well, first of all, I wasn't there in the third when all the officers were present.
No.
Right? So
But on the 4th of May?
So on the 4th, you know, when I became aware of the incident, bearing in mind I became aware after about 8 o'clock at night that we still didn't have statements, I would have need to have found out the officers' home addresses and gone round the home addresses of the police officers, which is not something we've ever done before. We've always arranged, you know, to see them, you know, within a police office. But I think the fact is on the 3rd we didn't speak to the officers. On the 4th I didn't speak to the officers. We later, and you most like, I would imagine you'll come on to it, we asked Police Scotland to undertake that task, and that's what had happened previously. Communication had all been done through Police Scotland. I talked about on Friday about serving the letter of instruction, for want of a better expression, to be serving the police, and within that would be operational statements from all officers involved in this incident, or we would identify the officers. That's how we went about our business, and that's what was agreed with Police Scotland, what would happen then. Okay. This obviously caused a conundrum, and it's caused a concern. What if this happens? Because I don't think we've overcame what will happen if a police officer says, I'm not giving you a statement. Yeah. So to ensure that there's no ambiguity in our minds, and I'm now just speaking generally here, is I think it's best to actually, if I'm at an out-and-out instance or I'm at a PIM, I will ask to speak to the police officers. Now, the way the PIP process is designed, I have to ask the PIM manager if I can speak to the police officers. Right. We've never been refused to speak. I don't know what happened if we ever were refused. That would then become a bit of a, because the PIP is for welfare and to aid the investigation. Okay. And I would go in and I would explain to the officers, I would explain who I am, what instruction I'm working under, okay, and I would say to them, you're witnesses to this incident, I need statements from you. Is there any issue with getting a statement from you? Okay. Now, I'm hoping by that time we've got basic facts, we've got initial accounts, okay, and then there'll be arrangements made within 48 hours for statements to either for them to write their own statements or type their own statements, or B, I will supply teams to take the statements. And so there's no ambiguity what we are asking of them and what their status is and what legislation we're working under. Okay. But what I feel at that time is we never spoke to these officers, and there may be some of you will come on to that, later about that.
So you mentioned you would have had to have gone to their home addresses.
Yes.
This was on the 4th when you became involved as lead investigator.
Yes.
When would you have done that if you had been taking that direct action?
But I wouldn't have. But I wasn't taking that direct action.
You weren't, but if you had,
no.
would you have done that on the 4th, or would you have done it later?
No, I wouldn't have done it on the 4th because so I'm getting this information after 8 o'clock at night. How many staff have I still got on at that time of night? I don't know. I've been away to post-mortem. I've then gone to Kirkcaldy. I've sat with Pat Campbell. So the actual mechanics and the availability of people to go and do that, I don't think I would have had that time. So it wouldn't have been done that night.
When
if I'd taken that approach,
if you'd taken that approach,
yeah.
When would you have had the manpower to, or the resources to make that direct contact with officers?
If that was the line, and that wasn't the line I took, but talking in hindsight here and hypothetically, then the earliest it would have been the 5th, if the officers were available on the 5th, and if the officers agreed.
Right. And looking at the situation now, if you have a scenario in the future where officers decline to provide statements for whatever reason, seeking legal advice or otherwise, or you have a situation where the post-incident manager refuses permission for PIRC to speak to the officers. Is there any way you, or any further powers you would like to be able to try and have that direct contact? And do you think that would help?
I said earlier about this unique position that police officers have, you know, in the fact of, you know, being able to use force. But the way I see the law and the way the legislation is written for in respect of a Crown investigation, if they're witnesses, I can't force a witness to give me a statement. Now, I know from my liaison with like the IOPC or the IPCC is they do have the power to require an officer to attend. So they have that power. But the officers just stare at them. You know, they don't give information. That's the feedback that I've had when I've had discussions with like my counterparts in the IPCC. So this is, if they're witnesses, if it's considered this is a criminal investigation, bear in mind it was a death investigation, but if it's considered a criminal investigation, as we can't force a witness to give a statement. Yeah, we can't force it.
Are there any circumstances where you can force a witness to give a statement?
No, there's none. I could and at that time, I could, if I considered them to have been suspects, I could have detained the officers. But they're afforded all the rights over, it's now an arrest, as we know, but, you know, I could have, if I considered that their status was that of suspects, I could have detained them.
But you still couldn't force them to give a statement if they'd been detained and were suspects?
No, I would interview them under audio-visual conditions and they would just say no comment or just not comment.
And we've heard about the different statutory authorities where you can have a Crown-led investigation, so direction from the Crown to PIRC, as was this case.
Yes.
Or you can have a Chief Constable-led or instruction.
Yes.
And my understanding is that the powers of PIRC are different under each of those scenarios.
Yes.
And there may be further powers available if it's Chief Constable
That's correct.
directed. Now, if it was a Chief Constable direction, would that afford PIRC further powers that would allow you to demand statements from officers?
We can require under the legislation, but would they give the statement? That becomes the conundrum.
Right. So you can require the Chief Constable to
provide
those
information. The
statements.
information we want is a statement from their employee.
But again, that could be I'm not saying anything.
Yeah. So how do you I don't know how you overcome this. You know, a duty of candour given, you know, the privileged position they're in, but how do you actually get that from them?
Do you have any ideas?
No, I don't. I have to be honest with you, I don't.
All right, thank you. Can I ask you about an aspect of communication between the police and PIRC?
Yes.
Roughly in that period, the day prior to you coming on, the day of the 4th of May, you were asked about this in relation to a statement Gary McEwen had given, and he spoke about this in evidence, that the family had requested to Mr. McEwen, Gary McEwen, an opportunity to lay flowers at Hayfield Road, where Mr. Byle had been restrained. And I think you indicate that you were asked about that. Did you know that the family had made that request to Gary McEwen?
I have no recollection of that. I have no recollection. How was that? Was that communicated to me in some format?
Gary McEwen does not specify, as far as I'm aware, that, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that he advised you of that matter. If you had been aware of that, is that something you could have facilitated
Absolutely.
as lead investigator?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that something that PIRC can have facilitated in the past with other members of families?
Yes, we have. I've had other death investigations that have occurred outside we have facilitated that.
Thank you. Can I ask you about when this is after the post-mortem,
Yes.
when the family had a viewing of
Yes.
the body? And as I understand the position, there was something said at that viewing by a relative of Mr. Bio,
Yes.
and they made comments. It said that there would be some sort of violence or repercussions as a result
Yes.
of this. And I wonder if I can ask you about your statement, paragraph 102. And I think we heard something of this when Mr. Lewis, the Flow, gave evidence
Yes.
that he'd prepared a report,
Okay.
which I think came to your attention. Is that right?
Yeah.
And here we are. You're asked about following the family viewing of the body. Mr. Lewis submitted an incident message stating that during the viewing, a brother-in-law of Mr. Bio had made comments that there would be violence as a result of Mr. Bio's death. And you say, I do recall Alistair Lewis submitting a message. The message was passed to the incident room. My recollection is that no action was taken. I believe that this was a comment made at a time of considerable duress by a family member.
Yes.
And did you treat this as a serious matter that required investigation or further action to be taken?
No, I didn't treat it. I treated it as I've said there. I didn't. It's obviously, as we talked about on Friday, the kind of how traumatic attending a mortuary, to view one of your loved ones. No, I didn't consider this a concern. I can't recall if I spoke to Police Scotland about it in respect of community impact, because that's the side they deal with. It's not PIRC's role, but I didn't consider this of any great concern. I have to be honest with you.
Is it customary for flows to issue these things called incident messages if anything's been said at a post-mortem in these circumstances?
No, I was no. No, it may have been something that would, is connected to the family. So I would expect it would be recorded into the flow log. It may be brought to my attention. It's in the flow log. There was an instant message put in, but I don't recall us myself deeming it necessary to take any action in respect to that. As I said, I spoke to Alistair about it, and my recollection is that I felt it was, if there'd been something else that came to light, then obviously that would have changed my thinking. But I don't recall.
I'm interested in the distinction between maybe something being noted in the flow log and maybe brought to your attention at some point, and what's called here an incident message. Is there a difference in status relating to?
No, it's all information that's contained within the MIR, the major incident room. It's all information that's contained in there. Alistair obviously decided to put it into an instant message. I would need to look at his flow log for that day and see if it was mentioned in that. I can't recall.
Do you understand why he elected to put it in an incident message and draw it to your attention that way?
I maybe thought it would get to my attention quicker.
When you spoke to Mr. Lewis about this, was there any expectation that you would do something in relation to this?
Sorry, I can't recall. That's something that Alistair would need to feed an expectation that
we may hear that there's not an entry in the flow log describing this.
Okay.
Does that surprise you?
Well, it's recorded and it's recorded into the incident, so it's not like it's not recorded and we're not aware of it.
All right. Now, on Friday we touched on the issue of the knife.
Yes.
And I'd like to just finalise one entry in the
Yes,
daybook
sure.
and ask you about
Yes.
that before we leave it? It's, if we can have the daybook, it's PIRC, oh sorry. It's, sorry, I can't see the reference to this now.
4520.
Let's try. That's the one. PIRC 4520, thank you so much. I think it's page 28. There's a reference to a knife at the very bottom of that page. Now, if we look at page, we just look at the very, very bottom of page 28. Keep going. Well, one of the sheets is a covering sheet, so let's try page 27. There it is. You see at the very bottom it says knife question mark question mark. Just to put this into context, if we go to the previous page, which would be page 26, you'll see at the top of that page, this is dealing with Thursday the 7th of
Oh,
May.
thank you.
So you've reported on duty on the 7th of May,
Yes.
and then if we look at page 27, which is the next page, this is the part of your daybook where you're dealing with items on that day. Because I think you were asked on Friday when you became aware that the information in the briefing note about the knife was incorrect. And I just want to look at the bottom of that page there, where there's a reference to knife question mark question mark. Do you remember anything about the reason you made that note on that day? That's the 7th of May.
Sorry, I'm just reading the sort of previous entries to try and get a wee kind of flavour of
Yes,
why I
please
had
do.
that. Right, so these are notes I've made before the morning briefing, because I've got the morning briefing at 8, the next page, 8:35 meeting. No, I'm unsure. I'm unsure. It may well have been in respect of, did we have a knife? Had we taken possession of the knife yet? Maybe it have been we had the knife, but then we need to consider what forensic approach we take to a knife, because you need to be careful what process you use first. If we're looking for fingerprints, we're looking for DNA. What process takes precedent? Because if you do one before the other, you destroy. And I can't remember which way it is at this moment in time. But I'm surmising there. I'm surmising.
All right. I just wanted to ask you in case that refreshed your memory. Can we move on then to something, paragraph 136 of your inquiry statement. So this will be 421. And there's a reference to decision 34 in the policy log. And it's quoted there, decision 34, it is clear that Crown Office are providing information to Mr Anwar, the family solicitor, regarding the investigation, post-mortem and other findings. Now this entry in the log is dated the 17th of May.
Yes.
And there was this note that information was being provided to Mr Anwar. PIRC are unsighted on some of these matters, and this can undermine and compromise our dealings with the deceased family. And that's an entry in the policy log made by Mr McSporran.
Yeah.
And you say, yes, I did. This course of action presented a challenge in PIRC's dealings with the family and their lawyer, as it could arise that information provided by the Flows was at variance to that already provided by Crown Office. Can you tell us a little bit more about this issue and the difficulties that PIRC experienced because of it?
I mean, as I say in my response to that really question there is the normal process in dealing in a death investigation is the family liaison officers are the single point of contact with the family. And all information in respect of the instant you're investigating, whilst you are conducting that investigation, is routed through the family liaison officers. So you have this single point of contact. You're trying to minimise any ambiguity, any conflict of information, any inaccurate information being passed. And the reason I say that is COPFS are aware of what we tell them. Okay, but that's getting told to them in a kind of briefing paper, or if there's a meeting. You know, the live and current information is being held in the investigation, and then you know, by myself and John in the incident room. So, if you have COPFS providing information to the family solicitor, who is who's the point of contact for the family, and he is relaying that to the family, then when the Flows have a meeting with the family, not every meeting was Mr Anwar at with the Flows, and they provide some information that's at variance to what Crown, then that is compounding in my mind what happened in the first day of this investigation. This conflicting information being passed to the family that really prevented or presented untold issues in the relationship and the building a relationship with the family and building trust. You know, so the whole point of that, and I think it was Mr Mitchell then took that up with Crown, is we're not saying Crown don't tell information to the family. The family where Mr Anwar was in fairly, my understanding, fairly regular dialogue with senior officials within Crown. But if they are, tell us what you're telling them. So at least the Flows, when they go to see, because the Flows could be going in there and they're saying, well, we've been told by the Lord Advocate that this has happened, and we're like, well, we don't know that. You know, they've maybe said something that's more current than what Crown have told them, and more accurate than what Crown's told them. You know, so I agree with what John said there.
So it could be that the Crown information that's being shared is perhaps based on an old briefing paper or out of date?
Yeah, because as we gather more evidence, you know, you start to get a clearer picture of what's happened, you know.
Or it could be that their information is bang up to date, but the PIRC aren't aware of it.
Yeah, could well be. It could be information that came direct from the pathologist to them. The pathologist is employed by the Crown, not PIRC, you know.
Right. Can we look at paragraph 138 of your statement? I think here your response is, in my experience both with the police and that of PIRC, this was unusual, and I cannot recall another time this has happened whilst a live investigation was ongoing and prior to the circumstances being reported to Crown Office. So the PIRC investigation's ongoing, it's
yes.
live. There's not been a report to Crown Office at that stage, but in that period of time the Crown are having direct conversations with the lawyer who's the single point of contact for the family.
Yes.
Right. And up until that point, had you experienced this happening with any other investigation?
No.
Since then, have you experienced it with an investigation?
No.
Right. Do you, looking back now, do you think some of the difficulties with communication with the family in relation to the Flows contributed to this situation arising?
I don't think difficulties with the flow. I think the challenge arose because of the fact of what happened in day one and what happened on the 3rd of May. You had these, right from the very start, conflicting information passed to the family, ostensibly as death messages, You then had a senior officer visiting the family, passing on information. I remember, you know, from the family saying that, you know, that Mr McEwen says, I shouldn't be telling you this, you know, and then that, I don't know how Police Scotland had a challenge identifying and introducing flows in the 3rd of May, being the size of the organisation they are, and it's never been an issue before and it's never been an issue since. So why were all these issues thrown up on the first day of this investigation? And that compounded by the time when Alistair and John got to sit down with the family. My feeling is they were on the back foot in trying to build a relationship with the family because of what had preceded beforehand. You know, so yeah, and for whatever reason, the family solicitor engaged directly with Crown and directed with very senior people within Crown in respect of that. I'm not aware of that ever happening. And that may have happened in other investigations, but I'm not aware of it. And it's not something we got feedback from, or, you know, so I'm not aware of it.
So from your perspective, on the 4th of May, as lead investigator and then to be involved
Yes.
after that with John McSporran, many of these issues arose because of the difficulties on the 3rd of May.
Absolutely.
And they continued to have an impact.
Compounded by a number of things, you know, the numerous death messages passed to the family, conflicting information, the failure to deploy flows, the failure for the PIM process or the PIP process to work with you know, and then we ended up, we didn't have any statements. There was all these matters all compounding in, as well as you'd a death of a black man in the street whilst being arrested by the police.
And you've talked about the impact of that in your investigation. Did it have an impact on the relationship between PIRC and the family?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
And did it have an impact on PIRC's relationship with the Crown?
No, I don't think that. I'm not aware of. Certainly, then Mr Mitchell spoke to Crown. So how that was viewed and how that was received, that's for Mr Mitchell to talk about. But
he's given a statement to the inquiry about this matter, so we'll no doubt hear from
yes,
him at some point.
My job and John's job when we take on is to conduct an effective investigation and gather the evidence, examine that evidence, and report to Crown on that. And then, you know, if Crown wish further investigations undertaken, which is not unusual, then we would do that further investigation, and Crown make a decision in respect what takes place. So we were working through these challenges to get that information. It just felt as if there was always a hurdle. Every day there was a hurdle, you know, there, and going in, right, what have we got? And, you know, bang, bang, we've got this, right? It's, you know, so as I said in my Rule 8, everything was slow, taking longer than it should have done. Everything felt like a bit of a, I wouldn't say a fight, but everything was a challenge.
We'll come back to that. Thank you. Can I ask you about a couple of issues regarding the behaviour of investigators?
Yes.
Now, if we could look at paragraph 116. You were asked about PIRC taking a statement from Mr. James Hume. And your response to that is, well, in relation to the question you were asked, PIRC investigators took a statement from James Hume regarding drugs and alcohol and such like. And Mr. Hume said that he felt he was being asked leading questions and it felt accusatory rather than fact-finding. And he was left upset, and it built up mistrust from him towards PIRC and the police. And your response is you were not aware of any concerns raised by witnesses in relation to PIRC's report.
No.
approach. Given the cause of death, information regarding the deceased use of alcohol, drugs and steroids was absolutely central to the matter under investigation. How this information was elicited I cannot answer, but should be referred to the investigators who obtained Mr. Hume's statement.
Yes.
As when you were taking on the role of lead investigator or deputy to Mr. McSporran, is this the type of information you'd like to be brought to your attention if witnesses have concerns about the behaviour of PIRC investigators?
Absolutely.
What could you do in your role, either as lead investigator or deputy, to resolve issues like this?
Well, you know, if you can't do anything unless you're made aware of something, you know. So if Mr. Hume had passed that information to us, or information that came via the family solicitor, and Mr. Hume was a family, friend of Mr. Bayou, then yeah, in the first instance, I would have spoken to the two investigators in respect of what had happened, and if necessary, Mr. Hume could have made a complaint. We have a complaint process which is clearly documented on our website and was at that time, and a complaint would have been taken. It would have been passed to somebody independent within PIRC, I would suspect, not within investigations department, and passed to that person to investigate that complaint.
Right. If you were line manager and a complaint was made,
Yes.
About one of your investigators that you line manage, is that something that be brought to your attention?
Yes.
And were you aware of any complaints? This may not be for you, it may be for someone else, but were you aware of any complaints about an investigator, Ross Crawford, in relation to taking a statement from a Karen Swan?
It's Ross Stewart.
Ross Stewart, sorry, have I put the name wrong?
Yeah.
Were you aware of any complaints in relation to Ross Stewart?
I was aware that we withdrew Ross Stewart from taking a statement from Miss Swan, or Mrs. Swan. The circumstances, I was aware of that. There's circumstances all round about, getting the statement off of Miss Swan, and I spoke to Ross in respect of what happened, because Mr. Anwar made a complaint about Mr. Stewart and taking the statement. I had actioned Mr. Stewart to take that statement, and I'd actioned alongside a person who was a non-police person, for better expression. Mrs. Swan provided information regarding a family conflict with one of the police officers. There was a reluctance in getting the statement, although the information had been relayed during a BBC programme that Miss Swan had been relayed. And the reason I put Mr. Stewart into that is, that the inference, as my recollection is, that Miss Swan was fearful about passing this information over to us. Now, Mr. Stewart's previous experience had been within the witness liaison team, the National Witness Liaison Team, Witness Protection. Right? So he understood how to allay fears of people who felt reluctant or whatever. But I'm aware that, and I spoke to Mr. Stewart about the circumstances of why Mr. Anwar asked for him to remove from that interview, and we sent down another investigator who doesn't have a policing background to take a statement.
So what were the complaints in relation to Mr. Stewart's behaviour that gave rise to this complaint from Mr. Anwar?
It's it was John McSporran that spoke to Mr. Anwar. Okay, but my understanding from Ross is during the course of taking the statement, it was just in the early stages of the statement, Miss Swan made reference to an incident that occurred with her brother. Her brother is a couple of years, she's the younger of her brother, and it was an incident that occurred, and my recollection is that an incident occurred when her brother was a very young age, and Ross had...
I'm asking about Mr. Stewart's behaviour.
Yeah, but Mr Stewart had
Sorry.
questioned how the
Oh, I
witness
see.
could recall that at such a young age.
Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, and Mr Anwar objected to that, stating it's not for Mr Stewart to be questioning what the witness says. And at that, my understanding is Mr Anwar contacted John and we withdrew Ross and put down another investigator.
And so it was resolved by sending 2 other investigators in to
No,
take
we kept the first investigator there,
the
who was a
first.
non...
You sent in a separate one
we
instead
sent
of
in
Mr.
a separate investigator from a non-policing background.
And we may hear further evidence about this, that Mrs. Swan had been quite upset about Mr. Stewart's attitude during the statement. Does that accord with your recollection?
My recollection is that Mr Anwar objected to. I don't recall, what happened with Miss Swan.
All right, thank you. Can I ask you about a separate matter now, please? Can we look at an article in the Herald newspaper from the 15th of May 2015? This is AAC 00379, page 7 only. And you'll see this is a black and white copy of, you'll see at the side it says the Herald,
Yep.
15th May 2015, headed Custody Death Family, Tell Us the Truth and Let Us Grieve, with some pictures and such like. When did you become aware of this article in the Herald newspaper?
I don't recall. I don't recall. I mean, I was obviously aware there was a lot of media reporting throughout the whole investigation. A lot of media reporting. So,
Were you having important media reports brought to your attention by anyone in PIRC?
They were being collated by one of our media office, one of our media staff in our media room. Yeah.
Right. Do you remember seeing this article?
No, I can't recall.
Can't recall. So on the 15th of May, you didn't yet have statements from the officers.
No.
They were the 4th of June.
No.
And there are a number of apparent quotes within the body of this. So can I ask you to look in the left-hand column
Yes.
in this article by Brian Donnelly, thank you, senior news reporter, and it says Peter Watson. Do you see that just at the bottom of
Yes.
the page? If we can move up slightly. Peter Watson, a lawyer for 8 police officers involved in the case, said that the officer feared for her life and had been attempting to run away. That's a reference just under a policewoman who is
Yep.
described as petite was injured in the early morning incident. And then can we move on to the next column, just slightly down, and again there's a reference to Peter Watson of PBW Law, and the quotation there is, "While it is deeply regrettable that Mr. Bio lost his life, I would ask the media and public to remember that a petite female police officer was chased and then subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked and stamped on her. The officer believed she was about to be murdered, and I can say that but for the intervention of the other officers, that was the likely outcome. We all seek the truth, and part of that truth will lie in part of the in the post-mortem and toxicology reports, which will follow in due course. Calls for the suspension of the officers serve no purpose and do nothing but add unhelpful rhetoric in a difficult situation for all." End quotation mark. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can I ask you about the comment that's made there by Peter Watson of PBW Law, where it is said in quotation marks that a very large man punched, kicked and stamped on her, and that's a reference to the petite female officer. Can I ask you now to look at your inquiry statement, paragraph 127, because I think you've been asked about this article. So that's 127. And I think you were asked about the article that was quoted to you, and can we move down to your response? I can recall that this statement was released by the SPF, but have no recollection of any discussion within PIRC about it. I do recall being surprised that they had made this statement. Now, just to be clear, the statement that you're being asked about here is the press release by SPF. And I wonder if we can just move up slightly. Could we look at SPF 00010A? So this is the press release, not the article that I've
Right,
just
okay,
shown
so
you.
I wasn't asked about the article.
You weren't asked about the
Right,
article,
okay,
you were
because I
asked
had no
about
recollection of that being in the paperwork. That,
Oh, right.
okay,
So you've no recollection of the article at all?
no, not the article.
Right. This is the media release
Yes.
issued by Scottish Police Federation. That stated the 14th of May, so that's the day prior to the article appearing in the Herald on the 15th of May. Do you see that?
Uh-huh.
And if we move down, there's a reference speaking in response to the comments made at the press conference by representatives of the family for Sheikh Abayo this morning. Brian Doherty, chairman of the Scottish Police Federation, said, "The Scottish Police Federation recognises that the family of Sheikh Abayo is mourning his death and that this is a painful process. The SPF does not wish to add to that pain by making unhelpful comments to the press. We're saddened that his legal representatives appear not to take the same approach. We're also saddened that his legal representatives are inferring police officers should not have the same legal protections as any other member of the public. A petite female officer responding to a call of a man brandishing a knife was subject to a violent and unprovoked attack by a large male. The officer believed she was going to die as a result of this assault. I very much regret that Mr. Bayo sadly lost his own life following this incident, but innuendo and speculation, whilst the independent investigation is ongoing, adds nothing other than to the pain and grief of the family. We make no apology for standing up for the rights of police officers, and we continue to extend to the family and friends of Mr. Bayo our sincere condolences." So I think in your inquiry statement you were asked about this press release, but not asked specifically about the article that then appeared.
Yes.
So the press release is the 14th, the article is the 15th the following day. And we can see that there are differences between this press release from SPF and the article that was published. And primarily I'm interested in the remarks from Peter Watson, who's representing 8 of the officers, it
Yes.
said. And as I understand it, he also represents SPF. And his comments, it was Mr. Watson's comments that mentioned the kicking, the punched, kicked and stamped on the female officer. Do you see that?
Well, it's not there anymore, but yes, maybe you said that. Yeah,
Yes,
it was on the article.
we can put
yes.
the article back on. Actually, I'm conscious of the time, and it may be that we should simply
Yes,
pause here.
we'll take a 20-minute break at this stage. Ms Graham.
Thank you. Let's just recap on what we were looking
Yes.
at before the break. So I asked you to look at the media release, and that was dated the 14th of May,
Yes.
2015. And, sorry, I'll give you the reference to that in a second. If we could look, first of all, actually at paragraph 127 of your inquiry statement. Paragraph 127. And this is where you were asked by the inquiry team about a media release that had been issued by SPF, the Federation. And your response was, you can recall this statement was released by the SPF, but you had no recollection of any discussion within PIRC about it. I do recall being surprised that they had made this statement. So when were you made aware that SPF had issued a media release?
I can't recall. I would imagine it would have been, I don't know what time the media release was released at. I'd imagine it would be the next day.
The next day,
15th.
so
The
it was
15th.
dated the 14th. Do you
Yeah.
think it was likely to be the 15th?
Yeah. Well,
You became
whenever
aware?
it came into the organisation, I would be surprised.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we can see there the doc ID is SPF 00010A. And if we can move down the page, we looked at this just before the break, and the media release from SPF said a petite female police officer responding to a call of a man brandishing a knife was subject to a violent and unprovoked attack by a large male. The officer believed she was going to die as a result of this assault. So that was the extent of the SPF's media release at that time.
Yes.
And so you didn't have any statements from the officers at this stage, but
No.
that would appear to at least be some information for you in connection with the petite female police officer.
Yes.
And did you know who that petite female police officer was when you read this?
I know they're talking about Nicole Short. Did I know that at the time? Yeah, I would have known that at the time because Nicole Short, we were aware that Nicole Short had been taken to hospital. Yeah.
We've heard evidence that Nicole Short had been taken to hospital after the incident and then brought back to the canteen at Kirkcaldy
Yes.
Police Office
Yes.
on the 3rd of May 2015. And she'd remained there for a period of time. And her equipment and clothing had been taken along with the other officers.
Yes.
So were you aware that that had been done and that Nicole Short was the female police officer?
Yeah, well, there was more than one female police officer at the scene, but I was aware that Nicole Short was the officer that had been taken to hospital.
Right. So you were aware that she'd been injured, taken to a hospital, and we've heard evidence from Nicole Short, and we've, can I say, she appeared petite, short stature.
I never met her, so I never met her.
Thank you. So you're made aware of this. You think it would have been on the day or the next day that you were made
Yes.
aware of it. And this is information that you didn't previously have in relation to at least one of the police officers, who you now know to be Nicole Short.
Yes.
And then let's look at the article that appeared in the Herald on the 15th of May. And this is at page 7, sorry. Yeah, there it is. And we can see, I referred to you before the break, on the left-hand column to the comment from Peter Watson,
Yes.
lawyer for 8 police officers involved in the case. The officer feared for her life and had been attempting to run away. And again, would that be new information that was available to you?
Well, it would have been, yes.
Right.
I don't recall that article. I don't recall reading that article.
Right. Do you recall anyone drawing this article to your attention?
No. I remember when the the Police Federation issued this statement, and
The media release.
the media release, yes. And I remember I actually think it was on TV. I think actually the SPF, if my recollection's right, was, you know, it was covered on television. And I remember being surprised by it, that they'd come out with that, actually, yeah.
And then I also referred you to the column to the right of that first column, where Peter Watson is quoted as saying that she'd been subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked and stamped on her.
Yes.
And I think you said before the break you don't remember, and I think you said now you don't remember reading this article.
No, I don't, no.
Do you remember if this article was drawn to your attention by anyone within PIRC?
Not that I recall. May have been, but not that I recall, no.
Right. Do you remember any discussions in PIRC going on around about the 15th of May that Peter Watson had said there was a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked and stamped on her?
I can't specifically, no. No, I can't specifically. I remember myself being surprised about the Police Federation coming out with this statement. In respect to that, there was so much media attention ongoing, you know, in respect of this incident. My primary focus was on investigation, taking the investigation forward and evidence gathering in respect to that. So there would, you know, that I can't recall that. I remember being surprised by the Police Federation coming out with that and why they did that. You know, that's obviously for the Federation to explain, you know. But no, I don't remember it being that information, particularly in respect of what Peter Watson is saying in the paper there, because it is different from what's on their official media release, if I could put it that way. Yeah, no, I don't remember that.
Was anybody in PIRC talking about the fact that this article had appeared in the papers and the lawyer representing some of the officers appeared to be making a reference to punch, kick and stamping on who you know to be Nicole Short?
I don't remember that. The aspect of Mr Watson and the Federation, that was I think I said on Friday, that was taken away in the main from John and I. It was dealt with by Mr Mitchell and the Commissioner, and I think you'll be aware of all the correspondence round about that. But I don't recall that. I do remember being surprised because, again, one of the things I'm not aware of the Federation coming out and making a statement in the middle of an investigation. You know, so.
I'll come on to the surprise in a moment, but do you remember any conversation with Mr Mitchell in relation to this suggestion that there'd been a punch, a kick and a stamp?
No, not at this time, no.
At this time you don't have any statements from the officers. You're looking for information about what happened at Hayfield Road. Would it have been helpful if that information had been drawn to your attention?
Yes, because that's the information we didn't possess, you know. Yeah.
And would that have had any impact on your investigation as such, or the lines that you were pursuing? If it was the case that Nicole Short had been punched, kicked and stamped?
It wouldn't have changed the investigation as it was going at that time. You know, on reflection, sitting here now, it wouldn't have changed. But it would have been something you would have been looking to say that can we actually evidence that? Did that actually happen, or is that just Mr Watson coming out and saying this? The benefit Mr Watson had is he'd obviously been in dialogue with the officers. You know, and we know that in hindsight. We know that in hindsight that, you know.
And it says in that article that he is the lawyer for 8 police officers involved. Do you remember in the left-hand column?
Oh, sorry.
I drew that to your attention.
Right, yes.
And it said the officer feared for her life and had been attempting to run away. Do you remember that? So you were aware that he was representing a number of the officers?
Yes.
So if you had had that drawn to your attention, who would have been responsible in PIRC for bringing information from the media to your attention?
I would expected that to have come from our media department.
Right.
Yeah, I hadn't allocated an investigator to research all media, so it's like it was the media, our media department was, something that gets done anyway. They look at the press releases, for what articles there may be concerning PIRC or whatever, on a regular basis. So I would expected that to come from them.
And in terms of your investigation and your expectations of that media department, would you have expected them to draw this type of information to your attention when they read it?
Yes, I would.
Or shortly thereafter?
Yeah.
If you had been, if you'd had this drawn to your attention, would it have caused you to consider whether there were any forensic implications of this information?
Now, I need to see the minutes, but we had, I think, about a week after the incident, we had a forensic strategy meeting with representatives from the SPA.
Is that the Scottish Police Authority?
Yes, sorry, and yes, Scottish Police Authority. We had a forensic, and the purpose of that meeting, and Miss Shearer was at it as well, and the Crown were at it as well, was to what evidence have we got, what articles have we seized, and what needs progressed in what manner.
Do you have an entry in your daybook or in your notebook that might relate to that?
I don't know, because it was minuted. There was an agenda and there was minutes taken, so I don't, that would be the best. But there was examination undertaken in respect of the body armour vest worn by Nicole Short, in respect of footwear and footwear comparison against. Now, when that exactly undertaken, there would be an action for it, and as I said, we had the forensic strategy meeting. An exact date I can't remember at this sitting here at this moment. And then thereafter we progressed the articles in the manner in line with what we'd discussed and agreed at the.
I'd like to come on to that the forensic implications, if I may, but can I go back to in your statement you'd said, and in evidence you've said, you were surprised in relation to the media statement that was media release issued by SPF, and can you explain to the Chair why that was of surprise to you?
I think it was maybe a wee bit of naivety, but and when in PIRC, in respect of any media releases that we're going to make on a Crown-directed investigation, we will not make that media release until we have okayed it with Crown. And that's the same as Police Scotland. Police Scotland will not make any media release until Crown say, yes, I agree with that media release. So any proposed media release would go to Crown, and Crown would examine that and a lot of times alter it, in respect.
Why is that done?
Well, that's just to ensure that there's. My impression of why it's done is just to ensure that there's an accurate message getting put out there, and also to preserve the integrity of the investigation in respect of information being passed out. Okay. So the police are aware of that. We're aware of it. Crown's aware of it, and there you have the federation, the police union, in the main with police officers in it, and they've made this statement. Now, understand, Mr. Watson, but the police federation have made this statement. So as I said, there's maybe a wee bit of naivety in my part, thinking, why have they just come out with that,
If the Police Federation had followed the same practice as
Yes.
yourself, PIRC, the police, and had there any media statements approved by the Crown or
Yes.
revised, would you have expected the Federation to also follow the same practice?
I think that's why I was surprised, but never having encountered it before, then, you know, I don't know how it's governed by them in respect of a Crown investigation, you know, and release of information, because that, you know, that's information being released, and as you say, prior to us even having sat down and taken statements of the officers or the principal officers.
We may hear evidence from Mr Mitchell later in this hearing in relation to concerns he had about things in the press from the
Yes.
Federation. Did you share concerns about the Federation or officers putting things out in the public domain through press releases or articles?
Yeah, yes. It felt as if at times that the investigation was being conducted through the media. I have to be honest with you, and I do remember that at one point the Lord Advocate, and I think the Justice Minister, came out and basically issued a statement asking for the running commentary, you know, to cease while the investigation's ongoing. So, what powers there was to prevent this, I don't think there's any. You know.
From the perspective of PIRC and carrying out their investigation, would it have been helpful for none of the media issues to be raised at that stage?
Yes, it would have been, and it would have been helpful in respect of our relationship with the family for that, because they're seeing this information coming out, and as the investigative body, you know, an expectation. Well, how's that information getting there? Why is that getting allowed to be released? You know, so.
Can I ask you, if you'd had this information brought to your attention, so the punched, kicked and stamped information,
Yes.
is that something that you could have discussed with the forensic scientists? I'll tell you why I'm asking. We've heard evidence that the forensic lab obtained footwear
Yes.
from Mr Bio and a vest from Nicole Short on the 14th of May. So that's the date that the press release, the
All right, okay.
media release was issued, and the day before the Herald article came
Okay.
out. The final report was sent to you on the 24th of August, and I say it was sent to you, Mr Little, by the lab.
Okay.
So that was a period of around over 3 months when they had those
Yes.
items. And you've said earlier today the order of testing can be of significance.
Yes.
Now, if you had known on the 15th of May that there was this suggestion that a man had punched, kicked and stamped on Nicole Short, is that something that you could have shared with the forensic lab and discussed with them about what tests should be done, what order of tests should be done?
It would have formed part of the discussion if we had. I think we had information about the punch. I think we'd spoke to a witness there who, by that time, and given us information regarding the punch. But the stamp. But we were obviously. How did we get to sending the vest before that? And how did we have the information? I can't remember. Maybe within the minutes of the forensic strategy meeting, it would identify that. I can't remember. But we'd obviously lodged the vest and the footwear prior to this newspaper article. So was it because there was a mark on the vest or checking the vest? I can't recall what the actual time scale and the order how that happened.
Well, this article is the 15th of May.
Yeah, I understand that.
And
I'm talking about how we got presenting the footwear, and asking for comparison of footwear against the vest, the body armour.
Can I ask you about, you sent the vest to the lab.
Yes.
Did you consider whether or not fingerprint testing had to be done at all?
On the vest? I don't recall that, no.
I mean, we've heard evidence that when they carry out fingerprint testing, they use a black powder,
Yes.
which can be dusted over, but that can have an impact on any woven material. And that can subsequently have a detrimental impact on the ability of forensic scientists to carry out subsequent testing.
Yeah, but I go back to what I said earlier. The whole point of the forensic strategy meeting is to discuss with the experts from the different departments of the SPA in respect of what articles we've got, what examination we'd like them to undertake, and actually the order and mechanics of how you undertake that. Because the example I gave was fingerprints and DNA. And I am aware that that if you do one before the other, then you're almost mitigating the ability to do the latter. So
you were aware of that when you attended the forensic
oh yeah,
strategy meeting?
I'm aware of that. Yeah, yes.
And did you say that was around a week later?
Yeah, I can't remember the date of the forensic strategy meeting. I can't.
Did you find anything in your notebook?
Oh, sorry,
or
I
in
never
your
looked.
daybook?
My apologies.
Oh,
I never looked. Sorry.
Would you have a look?
I tell you what, a bit easier, is it not? My initial statement right at the very.
Well, if you think it was roughly about a week later, that would be about the 11th. And there are entries on page 6 of your notebook, which is PIRC 04200. Entries of the 10th of May and the 12th of May. And that's page 6. That's roughly around a week later. Can you find anything? There is a reference, I think, on the 12th
Yeah, it's the
to a
12th of May.
forensic
Yep.
strategy meeting.
Forensic strategy meeting at Houndon Hall Forensic Lab. Strategy agreed.
What does that say after that?
Advised verbally that Sheku had amphetamine and ecstasy within his system. Full details to follow.
There's no mention there of any fingerprint or the type of order of the analysis.
But that's what I said. It was minuted the meeting. We had a minute taker there at the meeting. There was an agenda on the meeting, because there was a number of areas to cover. So there was an agenda drafted up, and there was somebody assigned to minute taking. So we had representatives there from Crown, Pathology, SBA, Police Scotland.
I'll see if the inquiry team can look
Yeah,
at that.
but there were minutes of that meeting.
Let me see. I don't know if this is actually on the playlist for today, but it's PIRC 04161. It's not on the playlist. What we'll do is we'll maybe come back to this in the afternoon.
Yes.
Once we can have that added and shown on the screen. And I'll come back to those questions once you've got the minutes in front of you.
Thank you.
Can I turn to another press statement, the 2nd of June. If we look at PIRC 04521, let's look at your statement first of all, inquiry statement, paragraph 159. And you're asked about another SPF press statement in that paragraph. So it's 159. So this is your 159. And you're asked about another public statement which read, and it's quoted here, the officers involved have never refused to provide statements. This is from SPF, a sort of press statement. The officers involved have never refused to provide statements. It was agreed at the outset with PIRC that they would revert to us when they wanted statements and when they were clear on the basis that statements were to be given. PIRC emailed me this morning at 10:46 a.m. asking for our assistance to organise interviews, and we answered at 11:29 a.m. confirming we would be pleased to assist. Those are the facts. And if we can look at SPF 00019. And if we can move down the page, please, you should see here it is, and it's in relation to the death of Mr. Bio, family lawyer heavily criticised, and it's issued on behalf of the SPF on the 2nd of June 2015. So this is 2 days prior to you getting statements from the officers, which was the 4th of June.
Yes.
And it says the legal advisor to the Scottish Police Federation has responded to criticism levelled at the organisation by Anwar Anwar, the lawyer representing the family of Sheku Bio. And the quotation there is from Professor Peter Watson of PBW Law. And this is issued by the Federation. And it says there, the comments made by those representing the family of the deceased continue to promote a completely inaccurate and misleading account. The officer injured remains off work and has had several hospital visits and is now in rehabilitation. An examination by a leading consultant confirms her injuries were significant. The injuries have been documented and photographed. And then the quotation goes on, and this is the part that was referred to in your statement. The officers involved have never refused to provide statements. It was agreed at the outset with PIRC that they would revert to us when they wanted statements and when they were clear on the basis that statements were to be given. PIRC emailed me this morning at 10:46 a.m. asking for our assistance to organise interviews, and we answered at 11:29 a.m. confirming we would be pleased to assist. Those are the facts. End of quotation. Now, if we could go back to your inquiry statement, please. That's at paragraph 159. That was on the screen a moment ago. Uh, 159. If we can look at your response. I found this unhelpful as it implied that the SPF were waiting all along for PIRC to approach them to have the officers provide statements. It is well documented the efforts we had made with Police Scotland and SPF legal representatives in this regard. And this was just an unhelpful statement put out to the media, making it sound, in my opinion, that we had been doing nothing in this regard. And if we can move up, at paragraph 160, you would ask for a little bit more explanation about that. And you said, I did not consider this statement to be accurate, and the officers had refused to provide statements on previous occasions as detailed in my earlier responses. And then at paragraph 161, again, I think you provide a little bit more detail. You say, I did not take any action. I'm unsure if anyone else did. And at 162, you say, I felt it could in the public's eyes, and this is in response to a question about whether the statement undermined confidence in PIRC.
Yes.
I felt it could in the public's eyes, as it inferred that PIRC had only to ask the SPF for statements from the 9 officers, and they would have complied, despite the fact a month had passed since the attending officers had refused to provide statements or complete any documentation. I'm interested in the situation that arose in relation to this
Yes.
statement that was made by the Federation. And if we can maybe perhaps go back to the paragraph 151, which commenced this passage in your inquiry statement, where it says, if we can go back to 159, sorry, 159.
Oh, sorry.
And we can see the quotation there.
Yes.
The officers have never refused to provide statements. What was your impression when you read that sentence? The officers have never refused to provide statements.
Well, that's untrue. Mr. Watson knew it was untrue. The Federation knew it was untrue.
And the suggestion then in the second statement, it was agreed at the outset with PIRC that they would revert to us when they wanted statements and when they were clear on the basis that statements were to be given. Was there any agreement with PIRC that PIRC would revert to us, presumably being the officers or Mr. Watson or the Federation, when they wanted statements? Was there any such agreement?
Not with me. I think I can clearly speak for John McSporn, not from him. As I said earlier, there's a lot of, well, the majority of the correspondence was taking place between the Commissioner and Mr Mitchell with the Federation. But, you know, that's just wrong. That's just untrue. You know, it's clearly documented the efforts we made to get statements, and for them just to come out with that and what effect that had. I'll go back to what effect did that have with regard to the family and the family perception that we were capable and able to carry out an effective investigation when you have a statement like that to say, well, you only need to, you made an agreement, just come and tell us when you want statements. It's wrong.
And what were your concerns about the impact on the family reading this?
Well,
if they did read this?
Well, if they read that, it would be the first question I think would say, well, what in the name of goodness has PIRC been doing? Yeah, because we've had, you know, any meetings we had with the family, we're saying, look, we're making best efforts to get statements from the officers. You know, that there's challenges that we're having in respect of that, and you know, for all we could say to them, you know, we've never came across this before. We need to overcome this hurdle. And then you have that when the Federation knew full well, and they had correspondence as well round about. The Federation knew full well that we've been trying since day one to get statements from these officers, or an operational statement from the officers, and then we would get full statements. So we ended up just taking full statements, you know. But that's a total misrepresentation of what was happening, and it reflected on. My viewpoint was this reflected badly on PIRC in the public eye and in the family eye. It could also have a detrimental effect within our own organisation, because we're telling them, this is what we're doing. You know, just the investigators are out and about doing other stuff. We're making best efforts to get this. You know, so keep working away, and we'll get this, and hopefully fill in the gaps. And then, what did the public think of that statement? You know, really kind of totally undermining a new organisation which we were at that time, and making best efforts to take forward the kind of new responsibilities we've been given. And then on the other side, the family must have just been, I don't know what they would have thought of us, to be honest with you.
So from your perspective, you come in on the 4th of May, you're lead investigator initially, and then you're working with
Yes.
Mr McSporran. As far as your evidence is concerned, am I right in understanding that you believe that PIRC were making efforts from that point
Oh, absolutely.
to seek statements?
Absolutely.
And as far as you're concerned, I think on Friday you said that efforts at that time were through Police Scotland.
Yes.
Had any direct contact been made with SPF?
Not by me.
Not by
Not by
you.
me personally. No, but I know there was direct dialogue ongoing.
And I think, did you mention Mr Mitchell?
Mr
might be
Mitchell
able to-
and the Commissioner, Ms Frame, was involved in direct dialogue with Mr Watson.
Right. Thank you. Now, am I right in saying, from my understanding of your statement, that PIRC actually responded to this statement publicly?
No, did I say that? I don't.
Are you aware that Mr Mitchell was involved in responding to this statement?
I don't think I said that, and it may well have done. I don't have any recollection at this moment in time.
All right. Well, I can.
Sorry,
move
did
on.
I actually? Did I? I thought I said I did not take any action, and I'm sure if anyone else did. That's at 161.
Let's look at 161. Do you remember if anyone else did now? Do you remember
No.
if Mr Mitchell
No,
took state
no.
action?
It may well have done. As I said, Mr Mitchell was in the main, the principally liaison with the Federation, Mr Watson, in respect to this.
Did anyone have any conversations with yourself or yourself and Mr McSporran about what action should be taken in relation to this?
I don't recall. It may well have done. I'm sorry.
All right, sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. Can I look at paragraph 29 of your second inquiry statement, 421, which is the one we're on, but go right back to paragraph 29.
29, thank you.
And you're asked here, did any lessons learned exercise take place following the investigation in relation to the incident involving Mr. Bio? And you're asked to expand on that.
Yes.
And your response is, there was no lesson learned exercise undertaken by PIRC into
Yep.
this investigation. Due to the time for this investigation to be concluded and then move to a public inquiry, a management decision was taken not to hold a debrief given the fact that there is this public inquiry. Who made that decision? I cannot recall. I do believe that we could have benefited from such an exercise. In my opinion, we can learn something from every investigation.
Yes.
Can I ask you about some of the different aspects of that response?
Yes.
You said there was no lessons learned exercise. We've heard evidence that on occasion PIRC can do a debrief or a lessons learned exercise after an investigation. Was that your experience also?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And do you know why there was no lessons learned exercise in the immediate aftermath of the final report being sent to Crown Office?
No, I don't know. I don't know why it immediately took place. We have a process now, you know, that's under the direction of the Director of Operations, who will call a kind of a lessons learned debrief, which includes everybody who's been involved in it, and others who maybe not have involved in it, who may have a contribution to make, you know. But no, I can't recall that. Bearing in mind when the report was going in, the workload had increased quite dramatically, and we immediately almost moved into the M9 situation, but no.
And after the report had been sent to the Crown,
Yes.
Do you remember anything resembling a lesson learned exercise or a debrief at that time?
No, no.
No. And you've said there it would be a management decision. You've talked about would it be the director of
Well, this time it's the Director of Operations.
operations?
Yes.
And in at the point where you issued the final report to the Crown, who would have been responsible for organising a lessons learned exercise or a debrief?
Well, that would have been the discussion. Mr. Mitchell was the director.
It would have been him.
I can't remember if he'd moved from director investigation to his title changed. You get a bigger portfolio, I think, and that's why it changed. But he was the director of operations, and John was obviously the SIO in respect of that. But there was no lessons learned exercise undertaken.
Thank you. And you say, I do believe we could have benefited from such
Yep.
an exercise. And can you tell us a little bit more about why that's your belief and whether you've had any experiences of benefit being gained after this type of exercise in the past, in other cases?
Yeah. As I said, we do. I'm saying we, although I'm not in the organisation, but PIRC does have a kind of structure in place for a formal debrief, a lessons learned exercise, and we talk through different aspects of it. I was involved in one, although I wasn't part of the actual investigation, or in particular what happened in day one, but the incident that occurred at the PIRC Inn, the fatal shooting that occurred there, then we held a debrief in respect of that. There was some areas came out round about that, exactly what I can't remember, but that's an example I'm giving, as I was invited, to provide some contribution if I could, or commentary if I could, just based on being one of the PIRC's senior investigators. From that, we had another debrief that I was involved in, where I was the lead investigator on another shooting, where shots were discharged by Police Scotland, and thankfully they missed. And so there was a discussion all round about that aspect. And there was lessons learned in respect of the management of the scene and the handover of the scene at that one, and also in respect of the goal group and who was actually the lead SIO in respect to the police side, and just making sure lines of communication. So there's two examples of fairly high profile investigations, and we sat down and we sat for an afternoon. I can't remember how long it was, but there was an agenda drafted up, to cover each of the points, not to identify, but cover the areas that people were covering, whether it be the initial attendance, initial call, the scene management, the PIM process, the interviewing, so we do have that now, and
Can I ask
but we
you?
didn't do it then.
Sorry, you mentioned the M9
Yes.
FAI. Were you involved in that PIRC investigation?
No, I was still dealing,
Still involved
in
with?
principle, dealing with this, so I was dealing with other
Right.
tests as well, but I wasn't the M9.
From the work that you've done in PIRC, are you aware if there was ever a lessons learned exercise in the M9 investigation that PIRC carried out?
Not to my recollection, but there may have been, but not to my recollection.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move on and ask you some questions that all relate to the investigation itself, the
Yes.
adequacy of the investigation as such. You'll know that Article 2 requires the investigation to be adequate. That's
Yes.
one of the 5 principles that are required. Can I ask you first of all about statements? You were obviously lead investigator from the 4th of May,
Yes.
and then became deputy
That's
to
correct.
John McSporran. Can I ask you to look at your statement 421 at paragraph 168? So paragraph 168.
Yep.
We'll get that on the screen. And you were asked in relation to officers
Yes.
that the PIRC investigation did not take statements from. And you were specifically referred to DCI Keith Hardy,
Yes.
DS Leslie Bowl, and Inspector Stephen Kay.
Yes.
And I think your response here is operational statements were requested from all police officers involved in any aspect of the incident. Only if the information supplied was lacking in detail or required further clarification or missing certain information was it deemed necessary to raise an action for that officer to be re-interviewed. And is an action a phrase where it's a request effectively?
Yes,
to go-
instruction, yeah.
An instruction, thank you. Similarly, if a witness had a statement taken from them, I think that's them,
Yeah,
by
yeah,
a
it
police
should be.
officer, I would not have asked for that witness
Thank
to
you.
be re-seen by a PIRC investigator as a matter of routine, but only if I required further detail, clarification on certain points. It is not practical to have PIRC re-interview every witness as a matter of course.
Yes.
Does this relate to pressure on resources and the number of people you have available?
No, I wouldn't say it related to that. It actually relates to the requirement and the need to re-interview that person. I said an action's an instruction. It's an action raised in a system, and the instruction is when it's actually allocated to somebody to go and undertake that action.
Thank you. Can I ask you about, we can see the names at the
Yes.
top of the screen. If I can ask you to begin by thinking about Inspector Stephen Kay. We've heard evidence from Inspector Kay. He was a temporary inspector on the 3rd of May 2015, acting as Police Incident Officer, a PIO. And he was listening to calls, and he later attended the incident at Hayfield Road. He was mentioned and heard on the airwaves. Why was there no statement taken from him?
Well, he provided. Did he not provide a statement? So I'm surmising here because I can't specifically remember.
Well, the question presupposes that he was not actually asked any questions by PIRC. So do you think you had enough information from Inspector Kay without the need for PIRC to go back to speak to him personally?
Without reading the statement at this moment in time and seeing what kind of action was raised in respect of that statement, if any action was raised, then I'm sorry, I can't comment upon that.
Right, well, I'll come back to that. Can we move on to Keith Hardy?
Yes,
He was the single point of contact. He was with MIT or MIT.
yes,
He wasn't at the scene.
No.
We've heard evidence from him. But he was involved, trying to get statements from the officers. He spoke to officers at Kirkcaldy Police Office requesting statements.
yes.
He attended the post-mortem. He was present during the meeting. As you have said, where you discussed the decision to
Yes.
disclose the interim results of the post-mortem. Why did PIRC not take any statement from him?
But did Mr Hardy not supply a statement?
So is this another example of he's given a statement and a view has been taken that no further details
Yes.
required? And can I ask you about Leslie Bowl?
Yes,
I think she was Chief Superintendent, actually.
she was, yes.
Yes. She was involved on the 3rd of May.
Yep,
I think we've heard evidence from her, she appointed Campbell as SIO.
yes,
She was the senior officer involved with attending Gold Group meetings on the day of the 3rd of May. And she was party to various discussions
Yes.
that day. And again, do you know why PIRC did not speak to her and ask for a statement?
Well, we did ask her for a statement. She provided a statement. What I do remember about Miss Bow is she was not involved in any evidence aspect. She was not the SIO. She appointed the SIO. She was not involved in the decision making. She ungathered no evidence, if I remember correctly. And the only, and I'm saying the only, this is again to my recollection, the only part that on the 3rd that I can recall that she played is she was involved with the SIO in drafting a death message.
Yes, we've heard that evidence.
Yeah, so really, I think Miss Bowl, when we asked her for a statement, she wasn't a priority statement.
Right.
You know, she wasn't somebody that you're needing a statement from, because I said she's not involved in the evidence side of things. And when she provided a statement, yeah, I can remember Miss Bowl's statement as well as the instant room. The statements come in and they go into the instant room. I think I explained the other Friday that I created and I tried to put in place a structure and put in a MIR. So the statements go into the MIR, and the office manager and statement reader, he would read the statements, and he would identify areas that he thinks need to be covered, enhanced. Right. Now these areas may actually have been covered by somebody else, so you don't need that. And I remember with Miss Bowl's statement as although the action was raised for a re-interview of Miss Bowl, I deferred it on a number of occasions because I didn't see there was other things more important being done than Miss Bowl being seen, as I said, because she's not the evidence chain. And I recall then I used the phrase I referred it. Again, these are terms within the clue management system. I referred that, and I think if I remember correctly, you'll be able to look at the action. My rationale for referring that one is we've now submitted the report to Crown. We haven't re-interviewed Miss Bowl because again it was my decision that she wasn't formed part of the evidence chain. And if they wished Miss Bowl re-interviewed, then they would get back to us. Okay. Now, Crown did come back to us about a number of people to be re-interviewed. One of them being Gary McEwen. Was Stephen Kay not part of that? Don't know. Sorry. I'm just thinking off the top of my head and trying to... But Miss Bowl was not... Crown did not come back to us. And Crown's like a fail-safe. We work under the instruction with Crown, we send a report to Crown, we send the statements to Crown, and if there's an area that Crown feel that we have not covered correctly, then they will come back to us and instruct us to undertake these inquiries. And that's happened in every big investigation I've ever worked on within the police, and when I was down in the States of Jersey, and this, and other PIRC investigations.
So PIRC treat Crown as a, I think the phrase used was fail-safe.
Yep.
If there's anything missed or that needs clarified, you would expect Crown to come back and make a request?
Yes, and likewise, if there's further instruction required, that I'm aware they had a Crown Counsel kind of working that, because I did meet her, you know, in relation to aspects of the investigation. Yeah, so.
Thank you. And you obviously recollect that Leslie Bowell was involved in drafting a death message, and you understood, I think, when you became lead investigator, that there were concerns expressed by the family about the differing information that was given to the family in delivery of the death messages on the 3rd of May. Did you consider that that alone merited a further discussion with Leslie Bowell or not?
I can't remember how Miss Bowell covered that in her operational statement, and I can't remember if that was one of the aspects that the office manager identified during the kind of examination of the statement. I don't recall that. Again, I'll go back to what I just explained there. If that was a failing and lacking, then I'm surprised that Crown didn't come back to us and ask us to re-interview Miss Bowell. Crown do have the option to break those as well, you know, so.
So is it somewhat reassuring that you don't remember that aspect being sent back to PIRC for further
I don't know about
investigation?
reassuring, as we weren't asked to re-interview Miss Bowell, so, you know.
Can I move on to Kevin Nelson?
Yes.
I think PIRC took 2 statements from Kevin Nelson.
Yes.
We've heard from Mr. Nelson. He gave evidence to the inquiry, and we heard that he lived in the area. He lived, his house was close to the scene, and to some extent he was an eyewitness to the events. Now, we've also heard from PC Tomlinson and PC Walker about an alleged stamp, which Mr. Bio stamped on Nicole Short, and that would have been information available to you on the 4th of June 2015.
Yes.
And I think Kevin Nelson's PIRC statements were the 5th of May, so within a couple of days of the incident, and then the 26th of August, a number of months later. Now, when PIRC went back to speak to Mr. Nelson the second time in the August, there was no attempt to ask him questions in relation to whether he'd seen a stamp.
Yes.
And I think you've been asked about this, and you've mentioned that in your inquiry statement, which I think is at paragraph 169. Can we have a look at that?
Yes.
And you say there, I did not think it was necessary for this witness to be re-interviewed. It's clear from his statement taken by investigator Pattenden that after he, Nelson, stated that he saw the deceased punch PC Short, he left his viewpoint from his front window and had no sight of the altercation until about 10 to 20 seconds later, when he entered his front garden and stood at his front gate. By this time, the deceased is being restrained on the ground by the police. So, did you have a conversation with investigator Pattenden?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did. And that was just shortly after the statement had been taken. Obviously, the information that Mr. Nelson provided was very relevant and very crucial. He's the only independent witness to any assault on a police officer. Yeah, so I asked her about the taking of a statement.
And I think earlier this morning you mentioned that you knew about the punch.
Yes.
And this first statement from Mr. Nelson was the 5th of May.
Yes.
So would it have been from Mr. Nelson that you became aware of the punch, alleged punch. You say, in your opinion, from that conversation with Investigator Pattenden, Mr. Nelson wasn't in a position to see the events that occurred after the punch. Was that your impression at the time?
Yeah, I maybe should have clarified that occurred immediately after the punch. He obviously saw her because he was able to view once he got to his front gate, and he gave us information regarding that.
Mm-hmm. And you found out from Investigator Pattenden that she'd walked the route effectively with him from his window to
she'd timed it.
His gate.
Yes.
And it had been timed.
And his hedges were high.
Sorry, what
His
was
hedges were high.
Yes,
Karine commented on that. His hedges were high.
Yes, and it comments there specifically that having taken the route from the front window and confirmed the time taken, given the height of the hedges, he would have been unable to see anything that was occurring at street level until he reached his garden gate.
Yeah.
Now, his second statement taken by Investigator Pattenden was the 26th of August, and the events took place on the 3rd of May. And I'm wondering about the height of the hedges on the 3rd of May. It seems to be that a view's been taken about the height of the hedges
Yes.
based on their height in August, at the end of August, rather than what position they were in on the 3rd of May.
No, my recollection of the conversation with Karine is Karine had walked and to see the viewpoint of Mr. Nelson. Karine's a tall lady, you know. I don't know the height of Mr. Nelson, but she's a tall lady, you know. So, but she did make mention of the fact that she couldn't see over the hedges until you got to the gate.
And did she make mention of what height the hedges were on the 3rd of May? If there'd been any change between the 3rd of May and the 26th
between the 3rd
of
and the
August?
5th of May. Sorry, I'm getting a wee bit confused here.
So
right.
the 3rd of May is the incident, the 5th of May is when he gives his first inquiry statement.
Yes, right, okay.
And then the 26th of August is when Investigator Pattenden is carrying out this, as I understand it, carrying out this timing of the journey from the window to the gate. I'm interested in the height of the hedges. Essentially, I'm wondering, did they grow during that period?
I recall having a discussion with Karine after she'd taken the first statement from this witness, because he was an eyewitness to part of the events that happened right here. And I remember having a discussion with her in respect of how you know, what did she do in relation to the statement? Did she just sit down and take a statement? She says, no, I walked it, Billy. I kind of walked the route to see what you could see. I took how long it would take to walk through.
So this was after the first statement had been taken?
My recollection is this is after the first statement.
Right, so that was after the 5th of May?
After the 5th of May, yes.
So when you say at the start of this, I did not think it necessary for this witness to be re-interviewed. He was re-interviewed on the 26th of August. Am I wrong in assuming that this is...
Yeah, but he was re-interviewed on the 6th of August in relation to a different aspect, not in respect of his view. If I remember rightly, and I haven't read his statement for a long time, as we re-interviewed him as a result of people calling at his door seeking to get information from him.
So you didn't re-interview him after the 5th of May to ask him about the officers' versions of events?
No.
And you didn't re-interview him after the 5th of May to discuss the hedges at all?
No.
Or his viewpoint
No.
at that stage? It was a completely separate matter.
Yes.
So why didn't you re-interview him after you got the police officer's statements
Because I didn't think
on the
it was
4th of June?
because I didn't think it was necessary because of the information that Karine had gathered and how she didn't gather that information.
On the basis that you assumed he couldn't see or hadn't seen events?
Well, we couldn't see because he said himself he witnessed the altercation between Mr. Bayou and Nicole Short, and then left his viewpoint and travelled through his house to his front door, out through his front garden and up to his garden gate.
And you didn't think it worthy of clarification?
No.
If you'd seen a stamp
No.
or anything of that side?
No.
I'm going to move on. I appreciate that I've said we'll come back to a couple of points,
Yes.
which we'll see if we can get hard copies over lunch. But I wonder if that might be an appropriate point to rise for lunch.
Yes, very well. We'll stop for lunch instead of 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay.